I am the membership coordinator of our DePaul chapter, and I'm going to do the honors of introducing each one of our panelists for the night. So it's going to go from your left all the way down the line. And our first one is our moderator, Melissa Isaacson. Melissa Isaacson is a columnist for ESPNW.com and ESPN Chicago and ESPN.com, as well as an award-winning writer. Melissa has covered Chicago sports for the majority of 31 years of her career. Prior to joining ESPN in 2009, Melissa wrote for the Chicago Tribune for 19 years, where she was the principal beat writer for the Michael Jordan-led Chicago Bulls during their championship years in the early 90s. Melissa also has ties to DePaul, where she is an instructor here and she teaches many sports classes. Our next is Lauren Camplin. We would like to welcome back one of our DePaul fellow alums. Lauren is a content associate at ESPN. Since joining the ESPN team, she has worked in studio productions on SportsCenter and in events production for Big Ten basketball and ESPN. Prior to joining ESPN, Lauren interned at NBC Chicago in the sports department and at the Chicago Tribune. She served for 2 years as SPJ DePaul's vice president, and she was one of our founders of our chapter. Our next is Meghan Bauer. We would also like to welcome her back. She is also a DePaul graduate. Meghan is now in her 3rd season with the Chicago Blackhawks. Prior to joining the Blackhawks, she worked for the Chicago Bears game day staff. While at DePaul, she also served on the SPJ executive board, where she was the events coordinator, and she was also one of our founding members. She also was the associate sports writer for the DePaul Young. Our next panelist is Kerry Sayers. Is an anchor.
It's me.
Oh, sorry.
You can go ahead.
Shannon. I didn't have her written down. Sorry. So our next panelist joining us tonight is Shannon Ryan. Shannon covers the University of Illinois Fighting Illini football and as well as national basketball for the Chicago Tribune. Prior to joining the Tribune, in 2007, that's when she joined, she worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer. From 2000 to 2007, she covered press, the Egos, and Villanova basketball in Philadelphia. Our next panelist is Kerry Sayers, and she is an anchor for 670 The Score. Previously, she reported and anchored for WFLD, Fox, the Big Ten Network, Comcast, Sportsnet Chicago, Fox Sports Next News, Northwest in Ohio, and the Empire Sports Network. Our final panelist for the night is Cheryl Ray Stout. She has worked in Chicago radio market for more than 30 years. Previously, she was sports contributor for WBEZ-FM, and previously she contributed to WMAQ-AM and WMBP-AM as a producer, talk show host, and a lead sports reporter. She won the Peter Lisagor UPI and AP awards for her work on the Bulls championship rallies and the Chicago Marathon. Cheryl has also covered both the Bears Super Bowl appearances, all 6 Bulls championships, the Blackhawks 2010 and 2013 championship, every Sox and Cubs playoff, and also the 2005 Sox World Series. Please welcome our panelists.
Cheryl, I thought she was going to say in every Red Sox and Cubs game ever.
I actually had to hear when they had the opener for the Cubs. I did not attend all 100 games.
Before we start, I'm just going to throw out a little advice because I think, all these aspiring journalists in the room, I should give my best advice for the day, which is don't cut an avocado with a knife unless you're really an expert at it. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here, and it's great to see, first of all, that you didn't all run for the hills after the documentary, because I know there are a lot of horror stories, and we can all recount our horror stories, and we will if we have any. Hopefully the younger among us won't. But clearly, the older amongst us, it was never horrifying enough that it chased us away for good, because we're here, and I for sure can say, and I know Cheryl can, and I'm sure Kerry can. I'm not putting you in this other age group here.
No, that's okay. I'm there.
Not yet.
Close
but
enough.
that, we obviously love what we do, and we wouldn't be here without the pioneers. I think we're probably close to pioneers, Cheryl and I, but there was still a generation before us for sure. that paved the way and, you know, did go through some hard times, and there's no denying that. But I think just to start would be helpful and instructive for everybody to just kind of say, you know, what brought you to sports journalism in the first place? Because we all were obviously motivated by something or someone to kind of head toward a field that is still not traditional for women.
I mean, I grew up loving sports. My dad, who's over there with the camera, he had White Sox tickets and then season Bulls tickets. So I just grew up around sports, and I love journalism, so I put the two together since they were my passions, and you know, worked hard to try and get where I could. And a lot of sports journalism I've noticed is networking, and you know, it's about who you know. Obviously, you need talent, but it's a lot, especially with women. If you know other women in sports, that's a big key. And Peggy Kaczynski over at NBC Chicago recommended me for this program, and at first, you know, I wasn't sure because I was always a print person, and it was television, and I'd only done a little bit, was a little nervous, but I'm at the best place I could possibly be, and it's definitely worked out. So my advice would just be, if you're passionate about sports, just be open to different opportunities and willing to work really hard.
I'm kind of similar where I grew up around sports, played sports growing up. My younger brother and sister also played, so it was always just something I was interested in doing. I didn't really know that I was wanting to work in sports until probably my senior year of college. I took a sports journalism class. I was in the journalism program already, but I took a sports journalism class and I loved it. And it just happened that the market was really bad at the time, so I decided to join the 5-year master's program. And then during that, probably last year and a half of school, I started working at the school newspaper, covering all of DePaul sports. And then I eventually went on to be the assistant sports editor, and I loved it. It was great. Previous to that, though, when I was a sophomore, I started working game days with the Bears. It was something fun to do, and it was like 12 times a year, and it was paid. So it was a great experience. And I kind of, after my my master's program was coming to a conclusion, realized that maybe the team route was better for me. I really enjoyed the team environment. Everyone was so positive, and I was not good at reflecting on the negative aspects of things. Like if the team wasn't playing well, it was hard for me to kind of cover that. So, you know, DePaul basketball we had our moments. So actually, Oliver Purnell was hired when I was there, so that was probably the highlight. But anyway, so that was when I kind of decided to go the team route, and I started working event days with the Blackhawks, and then I heard about an internship opportunity shortly after I was done graduating, and then I started there that summer, and I've been there since then. So I love it. It's great. It's a lot of hours, as I'm sure everyone else here is in the same boat. All the whole media industry is a lot of hours, but it's so fun. I love it so much that I would never trade it for anything else.
I'm similar to them, except I'm really good at finding the negative, I guess. Which, I mean, coaches hate, but yeah, I grew up just really loving to write and just making up stories from the time I could write, and then grew up in a really sports-centric family. And I went to a small school in Indiana, which is actually a women's college, St. Mary's College. It's affiliated with Notre Dame, so the newspapers it's the same newspaper for the school, and I cover Notre Dame football. And actually, I'm not just saying this because I'm here in front of a lot of women and this is the topic, but I kind of like the idea that, you know, this is a field that needs more women. And I don't know, probably because I grew up reading, like, you know, Susan B. Anthony biographies because my mom's like feminist and stuff, so I thought, like, okay, this is my calling. But, you know, I kind of like that you're changing something in society in a way by doing something that's out of the realm. But, I mean, besides that, just I think sports, you find the most, besides the games, you just find the most fascinating people, and just to tell some of those stories beyond, like, you know, they're amazing athletes, but I think some of the things these athletes have gone through behind the scenes, and you can find those, that's when it's like just so rewarding for me, and that's kind of why I got into it, I think.
Much like the other women on this panel, I also grew up in a sports-centric family, but rather than being huge sports fans, we all just played a lot. So I grew up a jock. My brother and I would play 3 sports a day when, you know, you had the pleasure of not having a job when you were young, and I was a pretty good athlete back then. And I just, as I came along, by the time I got to high school, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do, and there were some very strong females who had paved the path. And so I pretty much knew going into college what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. Actually, I wanted to be a professional sports, I wanted to be in professional sports, I wanted to be an athlete, but I was about 10 years before my time before they had softball and things like that. If I was 10 years older, perhaps I would have taken that route and really focused on that. But so the next best thing in my mind was to do a sports broadcasting idea, and I definitely paved my way there from the time I got to Michigan. My best friend's father had gone to college with the gentleman who's still the head of the sports information department in Michigan today, Bruce Made, and he's a name that's very well known, and he's worked his way up the athletic department there. And so I started working for sports information basically the day I stepped on campus, which was great in a number of ways because it exposed me to writing for game programs. I started with some women's sports that I really was never familiar with, field hockey and lacrosse and things like that, and then basketball, and then moved to the men's side and would work game days for football. And I happened to, this is all before your time, but the older gentleman in the crowd will remember the Fab Five at Michigan, and I was their student assistant for their first, for that whole tenure. So that was pretty much my claim to fame there with all my friends. We'd go out to the bar, and then I'd go to work at midnight and put the stats in the computer, and that was part of my job when they were on the road. And but it exposed me to a lot of sports I hadn't played, so the knowledge started pouring in then. Also, how to start writing, for game programs and such. No one was really teaching me that. And that was an unpaid position, but it was very well worth it. I also played some sports while I was there, so. But internships were key, and it was a lot about who I knew from there. Walked into a TV station in Detroit like the day after I graduated, and when they found out I had worked for sports information, they were like, "We need an intern. Do you want to work here?" And it was like that easy. That never happens, that things land in your lap like that. And that turned into a sports producership 2 months later, and kind of the rest is history. So it really is about who you know and where you've been. And for me, Michigan opened a lot of other opportunities pretty much right off the bat. Even my first job on air was someone who had been at Michigan, who had seen me on press row during some of those games and knew that I was kind of trying to find my way. So I would definitely say networking helped there. But yeah, so I'm sure we'll get more into our stories. I pretty much worked for a series of sports networks, mostly in TV sports broadcasting. I've done very little amount of writing, and now I'm pretty much just in radio with some freelance TV stuff on the side. Late starting a family and getting married, so more focus on that right now. But
well, as opposed to everybody else here, I did not have Title IX. So I did not have the opportunity to go to college to play basketball, which I loved, or volleyball, or softball. However, my journey began when I was a little kid. I had a grandfather that lived with us who used to drive a coal truck. I don't know if you realize that coal used to be delivered to homes and everything, and used to deliver to Wrigley Field at the Comiskey Park. And he came from Poland, and he was a huge baseball fan. And he lived with us, and there was 9 kids in my family. So I wanted to have somebody that, as an adult, that I could attach myself to, who was him. And the other thing about being from a large family, sports was one way to get out of the house and to do something. And because there was nothing else to do. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have a TV till I was 6 years old. We had radio, and that's why I love radio. But the thing about growing up and being out there and doing it, I just loved it. I was passionate about it. And I think that's what sports is, it's passion. You really have to love it in order to get into this business too. So as I grew up, again, not having the opportunity to play sports, I did theater too. And through my theater, I also, began to develop, be a little more outgoing because I was extremely shy. I was a very shy kid. So I started doing theater. And then when I went to college, I go, how can I marry my love for sports and my love for theater? At that time, there was only one woman writing sports in Chicago, and that was Linda Kay. And there was only one woman doing electronic media, and that was Jeannie Morse. That was it. So I didn't have a lot of role models. There was none in radio. So when I went to college, I decided I'm going to go into radio. I did radio, and I was able to get an internship at a couple of stations. And the one that I landed that helped me the most was WMAQ radio, which is now 670 The Score, but back then it was a huge station in, and in this market. And I started out as a producer, and as a producer, I was nosy. I think that's why I'm a good reporter. I like to know anything. I like to gossip. I like to know what's going on. And with sports, it's all part of that, that animal. So as I got into the station, they started acquiring some of the teams, and I was able to get a credential, cover the White Sox, because we had the White Sox. And the manager at that time was Tony La Russa. That's a long time ago. So I was able to do that, and then we developed a sports show called Topic on Sports, and I got to work with one of the most egotistical men ever on this planet. But I was determined not to let him get the best of me. So I produced that show. Eventually, because I had a great news director, he got me my after card, he got me on the air, and he got me to be able to be a reporter. And from there, I went on to other things, and I love it a lot.